Okay, we should be live connected. Megan, to you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the call. It's a great way to spend a rainy afternoon indoors. So I'll kick off with our usual housekeeping. The reminder Mike just said about this being a public meeting and everything's being recorded, and this recording will be posted on the Athens-Clarke County website afterwards, along with the agenda. Let's go ahead and do our usual kickoff of a roll call. Bailey Shea is going to drop a link in the meeting chat that we'd encourage you to click on that will provide just a little simplicity in entering in your name and organization so that we can make sure we capture everything accurately. But in addition, let's go ahead and go around and do some quick introductions, starting with the CAB members, and we'll close up with the South Base and Athens-Clarke County crews. So, who wants to go first? We just need name and organization.
Lisa Gautreaux, Action Incorporated.
Shane Blackwell, Northeast Georgia Business Alliance.
Amy Cassane, WNA Engineering.
Tom Lawrence, representing the Athens Green Building Council.
John Newland, representing Athens Area Home Builders Association.
Michael Songster, 100% Athens.
Charlie Glodenis, Athens Housing Authority.
Okay, Megan, you want to start with the South Face folks?
You're muted, Megan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I clicked mute before I started speaking rather than unmuting. I'm sorry. I'm Megan O'Neill, Program Manager for Policy and Sustainability Services at South Face. I have 3 colleagues on with me.
Hi, I'm Bailey Shea, Program Coordinator with Policy at South Face.
Mike?
Yeah, Mike Ford, Senior Project Manager on the Education and Research team here at South Face.
Thanks, Megan, Bailey, and Mike. And hello, everyone. It's great to see you this afternoon. I'm Lisa Bianchi-Posati. I'm the Policy and Sustainability Services Director at South Face. Great to be with you all.
You know who thinks they're going to get off the hook is all the ACC ex officio folks who've joined us. Y'all think you're not going to have to speak up, but we're going to make you. So Ilka, why don't you jump in there and get us started?
I'm glad to. I'm Ilka McConnell. I'm the Economic Development Director for Athens-Clarke County.
And I'm Andrew Saunders. I'm the Central Services Director for Athens-Clarke County.
All right, Melinda Lord. Okay, go ahead.
Hi.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm Crystal Coburn. I'm the Inclusion Officer for Athens-Clarke County.
Melinda Lord with Housing and Community Development Department.
I guess that leaves, from the looks of it, that leaves me. Tawana, did you say that you were there? Did I miss that from Tawana? And did I miss Tom as well? Both of you guys are muted. So if we missed them, you're there. And I'm Mike Wharton with the Sustainability Office. And hopefully Maggie Songster is also with the Sustainability Officers here too. If you are, Maggie, can you speak up? Okay, great.
Hey, this is Maggie Songster. I work alongside Mike at the Office of Sustainability. I'm very happy to be here today.
And as you guys know, Maggie is, if you can't, go to both of us because one of us will be able to cover what the other can't. So thank you for your patience as we move forward. If there are no more introductions, back to you, Megan.
All right, thanks. So quick overview of today's agenda. We'll go through some quick housekeeping, recap last month's August meeting, and talk about some next steps that are coming up that Mike will share with you. Then we're going to run through a bit of an education session that my colleague Mike Ford from South Base will lead that we've dubbed Clean Energy 101. And then we'll walk through the draft public engagement strategy we've been working on with you and wrap up. So we already did intros. There we go. And so our goals are to begin this education series and introduce our public engagement strategy. And we'd like to walk away from today with a deeper understanding of the context for Athens' clean energy goal and its impacts, as well as charting a course of action towards our public engagement process. All right, so now I'll hand it over to Mike Wharton for a moment.
So we heard at the last meeting that there was a desire to have or potentially to set in place the opportunity to have a common understanding that included terms and concepts behind the energy plan. And we heard that, and we see that as actually being able to fit really nicely into the public engagement section, the citizen engagement section, which is what we're getting ready to do, is this public engagement, community engagement section. We feel like that this could fit in really well, and it's going to probably slow down the process a little bit, but we don't feel like that's going to, we think this is going to be a very good thing. So what we've done is we're introducing for the next few meetings a dual course, a parallel course of activities. One is going to be examining the energy market, the energy field, terminology, where it comes from, how it moves, etc. So a set of educational modules, so to speak, if you're into education, and we're introducing those. And as CAB members, we want you to consider doing two things. One is we're hoping that it will establish this baseline. So if it's not giving you what you need, we want to hear back of what other holes there are. We're going to do an introductory level, and then we're going to ask your opinion by sending out a poll to say what other deeper information do you want? What additional deep dives do you want? So we want to know, is this meeting your needs as a CAB member? But we also want to hear from you if you have that level of expertise. In particular, it's not a waste of time, because what we're wanting you to do is look at it and say, will this work in a public education forum? We want to be able to put these modules up on our website, not only to educate our community members and help them better, but we're also looking at educating at a larger scale since we are connected through the internet. It's to provide baseline information to people throughout the state that can help them understand and maybe get the movement to go beyond the borders of Athens-Clarke County. So it's you as a CAB member, how does it fit with you? Is it providing the information that you need in that baseline understanding? Is it what other areas do you want to have in it? And is this module going to serve well for a general public update kind of baseline educational opportunity? So that's going to be the first half of this, and then we'll go into some public engagement, generalized public engagement from there. So we want to thank you for your feedback. It's been very helpful in directing where we go next, and I think it's going to be, we see it as an opportunity to really bring some great education to the community at the level that helps them feel like they're fully equipped to understand and engage in the educational planning process, and to benefit to themselves and to the community.
Thanks,
So, Andrew, did I get everything, or do you have some ideas as well?
I think you covered it.
Back to you, Megan.
Thank you. All right, so here's a look ahead schedule-wise for this education series and topics. So today we're doing Clean Energy 101, Impact Opportunities and Energy Efficiency. On October 7th, which will at 2 p.m. our regularly scheduled day of the week and time, though not our typical CAB meeting time frame, we'll have a session on the built environment and energy efficiency planning. October 21st, which is a regularly scheduled CAB meeting, will dedicate an hour of that meeting to energy systems and policy. And then the final two sessions that we have identified for now will be based on your feedback on an educational survey we'll be sending out later this week. And I'll go ahead and explain that survey a little bit. It's going to ask you to highlight which topic areas you have the most interest in learning in, but it's also going to ask your level of familiarity with those topic areas, as well as if you might be at a level of proficiency in them that you'd be comfortable sharing them in more of a leadership role on the CAB in our topic focused meeting. So please, we really do want your active participation in those. So let us know if you are interested in sharing your knowledge, as well as let us know where you have your knowledge gaps and really want to learn more, because we're going to shape this around you guys. And the 5 meetings we've identified here, that's not necessarily set in stone. This is a model in progress as we move forward and identify the needs that we have. So with this, I'm going to hand this over and subject you to hopefully not more than a minute or so of some tech stuff while we transfer screen ownership from me to my colleague Mike Ford, and he's going to begin the Clean Energy 101.
That's my cue. Hey, everybody. Excuse me. Let me see if I can do this again. You should see my screen there, my cover screen.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Megan, and thanks, Mike, for setting up the context of this. Before we get started, I just want to point out the chat feature in the platform here. This is a good time, if you haven't noticed it yet, to go ahead and just click on it and see how it works. That's the place to ask questions. At this point, the most efficient way, if you have a specific question or comment, I'm going to be looking at my screen here. If my colleagues, Megan and or Bailey, we have our separate little chat going here. If you could tap me in Teams if there's a question, that might be the easiest thing from my perspective if there's a question. I want to invite everybody to please feel free to ask questions, make comments. It was nice to hear the introductions and see such a diverse crowd. I'll tell you, there are people on the call here today who know more about building efficiency and design than I do. I come from an education background. That is, most people at Southface, my colleagues on this call here are policy wonks. Most people at Southface are in the engineering and the building industries. I'm in the education side and curriculum development and publishing, kind of a storyteller in the bunch here, and I get to interact with all of our experts all the time in developing our materials. So that's why I'm here telling this story today. In some of these future sessions, there's a pretty good chance you will get a chance to interact directly with some of our experts in building science and so on. So that's a little introduction to me, and I will be turning the mic over occasionally to some other folks like Andrew as we come to some topics here. I'll go ahead and move on here. I don't know how much everybody here knows about Southface, but just to be clear, in addition to helping communities plan around projects like what's happening in Athens here, we do focus a lot on training, workforce development, technical training. We have all kinds of good projects out there in the communities helping to promote cleaner communities and homes and workplaces. We do technical services for lead projects and really too many types of projects to list. But we do have about 40-year track record and experience in all the issues surrounding what we're going to talk about today. And one of the reasons we do an education piece like this is because a lot of people, especially if you're kind of new to these issues, it starts to feel overwhelming pretty quickly. We say we're going for 100% clean energy, right? And that one way to say that, the first thing that comes to my mind is it takes a multi-pronged approach. And this is just a little joke here to keep, here's your 2-prong fork here, and you can look at it. Renewable energy and energy efficiency, 2 simple prongs. But then you start to look out and there are all these other prongs and you get into all these other topics and it can start to feel overwhelming pretty quickly. And you start to think, how am I going to make a plan? Do I come up with a little simple flow chart to show how all these pieces are going to interact and work together? Eventually we might. It could take Maybe hopefully won't look quite like that, but it does feel complicated. And there are a lot of complexities in here, folks, but there's also some simple pieces here. And for me, it helps, first of all, to know, this is a long-term project. Yes, there are lots of moving pieces, lots of opportunities, lots of challenges. Things can get complex for some people, but at the end of the day, it's a project. And you have your goal, your big long-term goal of 100% clean energy. And we'll get to the point through this process, not today, but with working with the South Face team and so on in the weeks, months, years to come to create this long-term and short-term, medium and long-term goals and the milestones and objectives that are going to make this possible. So it's happening in other cities. It can be done. We can do this. So take that first. And I at the risk of having a little bit of chaos here, I think it's fine. I'd like to open up and take a step back, stop worrying about the hows and whys or hows and whats that we're trying to do and think about the why. And people can feel free to use the chat box, share some ideas, or just unmute yourself and share your ideas. Think for a minute, why are we doing this? There are no wrong answers here. Whether you're thinking about the planet, whether you're thinking about the city or yourself, let's list some reasons as to why this matters. And I'm sure it's not the first time y'all have thought about this, but I'd like to hear some responses. Social justice. Thanks, Amy.
It's a very quiet group today.
Yeah, climate change. Yeah. Think about how you're going to sell this to your community. What do they want to hear? What do they need to hear? Economic growth. There we go. Resources, leaving future generations with a better planet. Yeah. Equity, address high utility costs for our neighbors. Energy equity, for sure. All right. I won't dwell on it too long, but anybody else have anything they want to add in? Thanks for your input. So it's important to always keep that stuff in mind, the whys. And the planet, as far as climate change and the environment, that's always going to be a why. I'm going to come right out and say that front and center. That's part of the reason we're doing this for sure. But there are other reasons that are every bit really as legitimate. These are not little selling points that you try to squeeze into the conversation. Reduced, people said energy equity, we call it energy burden, you may have heard. Every city has an energy burden, so to speak. That's the relative amount of income people in that city spend on energy. Some cities, it's more of an actual burden than others, and we'll talk about Athens, or you may already have some insight into that, but we'll come to that a little bit later, so I won't spoil it now. But it's a real thing. It's real money, and it's not only families, but businesses can save a lot of money with lower operating costs in lots of ways. So reducing the energy burden is key. One side benefit of pressing more energy efficiency and lowering that energy burden is you get some health benefits in communities. A more efficient building is going to have cleaner indoor air quality. There's going to be reduced exposure to toxins and hazardous chemicals. Interestingly, in a lot of what's happening in green building today, there are also benefits in terms of just general well-being and productivity. When you bring more, for instance, more natural light into the indoor environment, which a lot of designs are moving toward today, and there's some technologies out there that make it even easier, it makes people happier. When the indoor environment's more comfortable, people tend to be more productive. So these things add up. Job creation is another direct benefit that we're going to get into. We're going to get into some more details about this a little bit today, but when you improve energy efficiency and you work toward clean energy, you're going to generate jobs. And this little arrow here was put together by GreenLink, and this was specifically for Atlanta, but I'm sure it's comparable in the Athens area. And just to point out that the projections are, if we keep things the way they are, our current fuel energy mix brings about 3.3 jobs to the area. When you start boosting energy efficiency, you're going to get twice as many jobs out of that, 6.5. Solar can add many more, 7.3 jobs. So this is not hypothetical. This stuff happens. Jobs are created in this process. And of course, so economic growth. And I just want to point out, Athens obviously is an education hub, an economics engine in the region. And, it has an opportunity here to lead and provide a model for other small cities around the Southeast. Athens fits a profile. It's a lot like a lot of other cities. And if you can do it here, that's how you're going to scale up these efforts and save the world, so to speak. Do it in Athens and let others follow and show that where the benefits really are for the whole community. I'll pause as I go from slide to slide if anybody has any comments or questions before I move on. And just a preview for where this is headed today. Today we're going to start leaning toward energy efficiency and how that fits into the model. But first, we're going to take a look at what's happening with energy here in Georgia. Just quickly, this is for the whole state. This is how much we spend on importing our energy. This goes directly to the argument of why you need renewable energy. 18.7 billion on petroleum. That's mostly for transportation, but not all. And that and the natural gas, which is 4.5 billion, those have both risen in recent years, not dramatically, but they're on an upward slope. And coal has come down in the last 5 or 10 years from about 1.4 billion to just under $1 billion now. And a lot of that has to do with natural gas prices. We'll talk about that in a second. And also just Georgia Power slowing down some of its coal production or coal energy production. And this is just a quick thing in Athens. I know you probably can't read this, but 25 billion a year goes out the door in Georgia. 500 million of that is in Athens. And the orange and gray areas here represent electricity and gasoline, which is the lion's share. About 400 million, according to the data in 2018, is going out of Athens to pay for gas and electricity. And just a quick thing. So if you say, okay, well, let's switch to electric vehicles and reduce that gas, the amount of gasoline we're buying, well, the orange is going to go up proportionately to as the gray goes down, because those electric vehicles need to be charged with electricity. So that's something just to keep in mind here, is there's never a clean trade-off, so to speak, when you're looking at some of these technologies. And here's a closer look at the electrical mix here in Georgia. We're going to look here at the statewide mix, and then on the next slide, some pretty interesting stuff that touches on your local situation. But this is the mix. We have right now a lot of gas and oil is almost half of all the energy production in Georgia, and most of that's natural gas right now. Coal, as I said, it's on its way out in Georgia, but it's still a quarter of our power is coming from that. Of course, that's not good for the environment. Coal, from the time it's taken out of the planet until it's burned, that's a major contributor to the CO2. Nuclear is clean in terms of when you're creating the energy. It doesn't have the CO2 footprint, but the mining of the uranium actually does have a pretty intensive footprint. But that's maybe the risks outweigh the benefit. I mean, the benefits outweigh the risks in that part, but it's also important to keep in mind that with nuclear, you still have the hazardous waste, and you have a lot of heavy water use. As with all of these, all energy forms, fossil fuel forms are going to require some interaction with water, and nuclear happens to be particularly water intensive. As we mentioned, gas and oil especially gas, has been going way up the last few years, and it's about half as clean as coal. It's not perfectly clean. It's better. But it also has a side effect of methane in the production process of natural gas. Off-burning of methane is not a good greenhouse gas. It's the worst. It's one of the worst. So, and the regulations around that are actually getting less stringent in recent years, as opposed to more stringent off-burning or off-gassing of methane in the natural gas process. Of course, then you have fracking, and then you have the fact that natural gas might not always be so cheap. There are market forces. Hydro. Everybody knows we can point to a few dams here in Georgia. Georgia has lots of dams, lots of rivers. Unfortunately, I mean, it is clean, and it's there's no CO2 footprint once the dam is built. But that's providing about 2% of our power here in Georgia. And there's a limit to how much you can expand that hydropower. And it certainly disrupts ecosystems. And Georgia has a lot of dams already. And then you have your renewables, which right now make up about 3%. And that's primarily solar here in Georgia. I'm sorry, I didn't read the footnotes on the null there, but I'm sure it's something very sciencey to explain that. But at any rate, we can still see nuclear, coal, and gas are the major drivers here in Georgia. This is an interesting chart. You don't need to read too many details in it, but it shows
Mike?
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt, but before we do have a question on the floor. Where do most of the raw materials come from? Coal, natural gas, et cetera. I think they're just kind of wanting to know in general, is it piped across the country? Is it trucked across the country? Where does it originate?
I'll invite my colleagues to join in here, but as far as I know, Georgia doesn't have a lot of coal sources, doesn't have a lot of natural gas sources, so it's coming in. I don't know how far it's coming in from, but it's not. That stuff's not coming from Georgia, as far as I know. Any other South Coasters?
Yeah, how about if I hop on this one and then transition to the slide? As I understand it, the majority of our coal comes from the Midwest or Western states. Wyoming is a high producing one. There is still some East Coast coal production in the Virginia areas, but I believe the majority of that is actually exported because of its proximity to ports. Natural gas right now is heavily derived from fracking. And in fact, last time I looked, about a quarter of all natural gas produced in the United States was burned at the oil well because they didn't have an end source for it. I honestly don't know where we get our uranium, and I hope I never find out, but we do have to supply our nuke plants. And then that transitions to, and there is a moderate amount or small amount of different heating and fuel oils. And those are a blend, as I understand. They come from both domestic and international sources. So strangely, we are one of Venezuela's #1 customers for petroleum products. And that's because we are some of the few people in the world that have the processing infrastructure for that particular type of fuel or oil. And when you look at this map here, you'll see a variety of different Georgia power plants. Now, there are additional power plants in the nation, and you'll see they're color-coded. When you start to look at those numbers under capacity, you'll see that there are some big capacities for oil and gas, and then nuke is another one. The good news is that capacity for renewables, specifically solar, and then some imported wind electrons has been growing in recent years. And one thing that I would like to be sure that our community knows is that there is already both renewable and non-renewable electricity being produced in the Athens area. So not a ton of people know that we actually have 2 dams in the county or right at the border. Both of which are on the Middle Oconee River, although I guess technically the bigger one's on the Oconee where they merge. We also have a peaker plant that runs off of primarily natural gas that is on the border with Jackson County. So that particular plant would produce a decent amount of greenhouse gases when used. We have a landfill gas plant at our landfill where we are harvesting methane and converting it into energy. And then some of you may be aware that there is a biomass plant that is opened over in Colbert area, another one up in Franklin County. That has been fascinating for me to watch because as a forester, I'll admit I have some love for biomass, but one of the particular plants was actually operating off of a decent supply of railroad ties. And so if you all have been watching, some of our neighbors and people in this community were actually able to successfully lobby to get the railroad ties taken out of biomass mix in Georgia this year. That law was just signed in. And so the real takeaway here, oh, and we have some larger solar arrays. So there's the UGA array. There's one out in Comer, and then there's also our Cedar Creek array. And then, yeah, we see Ilka commenting about some of our larger, we have the Lake Hartwell Dam not too far away. We have Lake Lanier and its dam. What the main thing here that I think we need to take away is that all energy uses, including renewable sources, have benefits and they have impacts. And Athens is already seeing both. So, for example, we could, as a group, say, well, we're going to drastically increase the amount of hydro produced on our wonderful rivers, but that would come at a very significant ecological and real estate cost to the community and the environment. And so I think the work of this body is to envision what does the future look like and what is that right balance for us. And so with that, I'm going to toss it back to Mr. Ford.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great. Yeah, it's a great segue into kind of the focus of the rest of this session. I just did want to quickly point out, and this isn't meant to be kind of depressing or anything, but it's just interesting. I mean, UGA has a pretty big solar array, not the biggest in the state by any stretch. There's some bigger ones, but that's close to 1,000 kilowatt capacity. And you just compare that to a Bowen, which is a workhorse coal plant up in the northwest corner of the state. It would take 3,000 of these UGA arrays to equal one of those, which, again, that's no reason not to do solar. Solar's coming on strong and it's making a difference. But in the meantime, as we start to phase out these other forms of energy, we start to, this graph kind of shows just, here's where we're headed in the coming decades. How do we get to 100% clean and renewable energy? We've just touched on the utility piece, the energy source piece, and we're going to come back to that. I think it was in the third session, and take a deeper dive into what's happening with energy here in Georgia and around Athens. But in the meantime, there's this gray area up here, which is energy efficiency and power savings. And the only way you're going to get to 100%, renewable and clean sourced fuels is if you have more efficient buildings. And we'll kind of talk about today in a moment, but if you take an old building that is extremely energy efficient and people are paying almost as high as rent in terms of utility bills, doesn't matter how many solar panels you put on the roof of that building, it's still going to be an inefficient building. And so you need to, there's this whole other side to this. And the energy efficiency piece is where you see some of your near-term benefits that are going to reduce that energy burden more quickly and create also the jobs and the health benefits in a shorter time frame. So you can, and also get community engaged a lot more quickly and more directly. So that's kind of the point where the rest of this presentation is going. And let's take a closer look at what's happening in terms of energy efficiency. Where's the energy being used? You're all familiar with transportation. And yes, that's obviously a significant chunk of the energy that we use. And that'll be part of the Athens plan. what's the long-term solution for cleaner transportation? And that's more than just clean vehicles. It means alternative transportation. It means walkability. It means talking about commercial and public fleets. It's complicated, of course, and it also depends a lot on personal choice. It's something that that Athens will address in due time. Industry uses a lot of energy. That's a little harder. You don't have a lot of control over how energy is used in various industries, and that's something not to be ignored. But there's a regulation, the business interests, technology. Maybe technology will help alleviate some of the energy use in various industrial processes as we go ahead. But as an Athens resident, what are you going to do to make industrial energy use more efficient? Go get a PhD and start working. But buildings, we all have buildings. We all interact with buildings every day. I've heard 90% of our time or more as humans, as Americans at least, is spent in or directly around buildings. So most of what we breathe, most of what we do, it happens in a built environment. And buildings are the biggest chunk of our energy use. And this is US. And if we look over here at Athens, if you add up the residential candle here, which is the pink, and the commercial, they add up to 1.2 together, which takes you to the top of the chart, pretty far ahead of, almost your industrial CO2 emissions are relatively low in Athens compared to an average city. Transportation is a big piece, but those buildings are where most of your energy is going right now. So about half. I'd say, just looking at this chart, slightly less than half. Just real quick, we're going to go ahead, but when we talk about buildings, we're talking about all buildings except for those that would be used in the industrial processes, but pretty much every other building you see out there. Really quickly, just a little bit more perspective. Globally, the buildings tend to eat up 40% of our energy and 40% of all our resources and a quarter of our water just in the operations and the use by occupants of buildings. And one point I also want to make here is that the construction process is where a building, there's probably somebody with a LEED certification, LEED credential here who could give an exact percentage. But it's pretty high percent of a building's carbon footprint happens during the construction process. And that goes to, if you're getting your lumber, they might have nice wood in Brazil, but the carbon footprint of lumber coming from Brazil is going to be extremely high compared to all these other resources. So all those questions about where the resources are coming from, how are we sourcing stuff, that all goes into these equations as well as to how we get to clean, more efficient built environment. Andrew, I'm going to let you riff on this one for a minute because you pointed this graphic out to me, and I think it is a useful graphic for seeing, for putting the built environment in perspective. Would you like to talk about it for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Whenever we look at energy conservation or water conservation for that matter, we get a lot of questions. And one of the most often questions I get asked is like, when are y'all doing solar panels? What's the next step? And I think that is the item that everybody sees and that generates a lot of excitement. But when we look at the approach to transition, we need to keep in mind that really is not our starting point. And so this particular pyramid has 3 tiers. I would actually offer a 4th tier, but it's a great starting point. And so those first 2 are all about conservation. The most affordable resource to use is the one you actually don't actually use, the one you avoid. And so we will see both through that previous slide you saw about the convergence between increasing renewables and decreasing demand. A lot of that heavy lift comes with the not so exciting things of energy conservation and energy efficiency. once you have maximized the low-hanging fruit out of those things, then you'll find that renewables are well suited and cost competitive. And then what we would add to the top is what I would call the displacement cap, or offsetting cap, where some of our energy use just cannot be produced locally from renewable sources. And so that's where a item like a renewable energy certificate or out of county production may be a suitable fit. So that was a long way to say that energy efficiency and conservation are the foundation on which we work.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that pyramid doesn't leave much question as to how important how important the buildings are in this. Pause real quick if anybody has any questions or comments. So let's look at Athens. Here's I believe this is a snapshot of Athens. Should look familiar to some of y'all. Any guesses what the energy burden is in Athens? I don't know if this data has come across your screens in previous meetings. Anybody know? It's 6%, which is higher than the average in Georgia by a considerable amount. And it also happens to be almost exactly the same amount as our individual income tax rate in Georgia, to put that in perspective. So it's real money that potentially holding back economic development, certainly economic opportunity in a lot of communities. Will that ever get to zero? I mean, that's not necessarily the purpose, but it's when you get above 4 or 5%, you're creating a real actual burden. Now, why Athens? Why is it so high in Athens? Does Georgia Power have something against the Bulldogs? I don't think so. It's the power is coming from the same grid in Athens as everywhere else. Now, again, we'll get to utilities, and there's lots of information about rates and so on to dive into, not today, but in a future session. But in Athens, the low-hanging fruit is you're looking at these buildings here. When does it look like the average building in that picture was built? Not yesterday. These are decades old. That doesn't mean they're bad buildings. They don't need to be torn down and rebuilt. But that's where some of that energy burden, if not a lot of that energy burden, is coming out the roofs and the walls of those old buildings. So that's what takes us toward our next content. We're going to get into I'm going to go through a lot of multi-pronged things here, and a lot of this content we're going to come back to. We're going to circle back to this in the next session. We'll go deeper into the built environment. Yes.
I want to highlight a question that came in from Mary or Michael Songster on the pyramid slide, where he mentioned that it seems like electrification should go in there somewhere.
Yeah. And why don't I jump on that real quick? Y'all are spot on. So another fundamental step in this process, especially in our region, is the desire to electrify. And electrification applies to both our fleets, the kinds of vehicles we drive and use around the community, and our facilities and buildings. The reason why electrification makes a lot of sense for renewable energy transition is it is far easier and in most cases cost effective for us to source renewable electrons rather than a renewable gallon of gas or a renewable natural gas therm. And I see a follow-up question requiring electrification of vehicles, and yes, absolutely. So if you were to just let's take the electric vehicle that everybody kind of knows off the top of their head, the Nissan Leaf, and compare it to an average sedan that same manufacturer makes, you'll find that just the fact of converting to an electric motor makes it about 5 times more efficient on the amount of energy input versus the amount of miles that come out of that as a result. And so once you've built this electric infrastructure, Then you have opportunities to do on-site renewables to power it, to work with utility companies to source renewable energy from the broader grid. And so I think that's definitely something that we'll probably continue to talk more about as we get into this process.
More coming in on electrification. It is definitely a hot topic. So I have a feeling this one will shine well in the survey to come out.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll add there is, does it matter what the source of electricity is? And I would say you bet. You know, if our electricity was being produced predominantly by coal and heavy oil, then you might be actually resulting in fuel selections that are more harmful to the environment than, say, just a natural gas or gasoline. But it's easier to change the energy grid than it is to change, say, our national gas and diesel infrastructure. And so that's been where a lot of that focus has been.
And it actually, and we're going to get to this in a moment, what you do in electrification of your transportation also impacts buildings and building efficiency. You're going to think I'm like trying to sell something as far as building efficiency goes, and I kind of am. It's an idea, but it kind of all comes back to the built environment in a lot of ways. This goes to you know, establishing the common language that Mike was talking about earlier. This is one of those things when we talk about residential buildings. In the industry, we're really talking about single-family homes and what we call low-rise residential places, townhomes, 3 stories or less is generally what we think of in residential. So a high-rise apartment building doesn't technically really fall in the residential building sector. It falls in the commercial sector, along with your offices. This is an old office building here in Athens. This is also, I believe, in Athens. This is a mixed use, got some retail on the bottom, some apartments or offices up top. We're seeing lots of buildings like this these days. And then anything else in the commercial sector is going to include your municipal buildings, your university, again, retail, offices, mixed use, and even manufacturing, warehouses, manufacturing plants. That's a huge building. It'd be interesting to see what the energy efficiency is in that plant. And of course, linking the commercial and the residential, you know, you have the rest of the built environment, the transportation infrastructure, which impacts how people get around, not only what they're driving, but do they have to drive in the first place? Can they hop on a bus? You got your energy grid. Power for these buildings is all coming from the same grid. And then you have the water issue, which a couple things here, and we always want to focus on this. I mentioned earlier that there's, you know, water is required in fossil fuel energy production, but it's also electricity, energy is required to get that cup of water into your hands. It's required when you pump it out of the river, when you treat it, when you pump it into the house, when you flush it back out of the house. Well, that's not an electrical thing, but treating what ends up in your sewers does require additional electrical input. Those pumps don't run by magic. They require, so it's small on an individual scale, you know, how long you let your faucet run as an individual, how much is that going to impact your electric bill? I don't even know if you can measure that necessarily. It's very small, but when you scale it out over a community, it's real. It's real. The numbers get much bigger, especially if in a big building also. That's why we put in low flow toilets and faucets, in part, not just to save water, but to conserve electricity. There's that connection is always going to be there between water and energy. So that's the basic breakdown of the built environment. When you look at where the efficiency opportunities in the building, again, I mean, this is pull out the fork here, the 3-pronged. You could make a 10-pronged fork. I don't know. There are many ways to break this down, but I think it's easy to think about the building envelope, which we're going to go through each of these in a little more detail here in a moment. and the systems within the building, and then how the building is used, what the occupants and what the operators of that building are doing. And again, it's important to think about, well, you don't think of a single family house as having operations and maintenance plans. That's definitely something more that we talk about in the commercial sector, but the same principles apply no matter the size of the building. Before we go into any of that, I want to take a step back, and this is a very South Face sort of centric approach to this, but it's important, I think, because it's important how you think about your buildings and how they interact with the environment. And does anybody out there have a guess as to where South Face got its name? Has anybody ever mentioned that? Why are we called South Face? Any solar techs in the audience? Let's take it back a few thousand years to the Pueblo people out in Colorado there. This is Mesa Verde. It's a nice example of how ancient ancestors figured some of these principles out the same way any scientist does, through observation, experimentation, figuring out what works. They didn't put this under any random cliff just so they could be out of the rain. They knew how to build roofs. What that cliff provides, and some people in the comments are mentioning this, that cliff provides that south-facing solar orientation. And it's the same thing a solar tech is going to look at when they come to put solar panels on your roof. They, not just any roof is suitable to have solar panels on it, especially if you have a building right next to you that's casting a shadow from the south side. The Pueblo people figured out that in the summer they were going to have this nice long shadow keeping them cool. And in the winter, I don't know if this was actually taken in the winter, but this would be the effect in the winter of having the sun coming in just a little bit lower and shining in a little bit longer during the day to give you some more solar energy during the day. So that's one example of a principle. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but here's some other ones. Topography. The mountains, some places have bigger mountains next to them than others. They can affect solar effects. They can affect the winds, what's happening with the winds, and any number of other factors. Topography matters in building science. Climate zones. We build buildings and we have different factors in buildings here in the South than they do in the Northwest, than they do in the Midwest and the Northeast, et cetera. Different needs depending on climate. And I'll touch on that briefly again in a minute. It's kind of interesting, at least for some of us in the building industry, what's happening with these climate zones. Other issues, and this is something we'll come back to in a later module, but the stack effect, what happens with air pressure in a building. If you have higher pressure in the building than there is outside, then air is going to be leaving the building, and vice versa. And that affects what air is coming into the building, where's it coming from, and also how much air are you wasting, how much conditioned air are you wasting. So the stack effect, what happens in a building, and the taller that building gets, the more dramatic that effect gets. Sometimes that's a factor. Thermal bridging is a factor that the Pueblo people figured out as well, that if you stack stones together and you heat one of those stones, that energy is going to transfer to the next stone, and that's how you get a nice warm cave or whatever. It's also how they're applying these principles in buildings a lot more these days in some creative ways. The thermal bridging effect, take advantage of solar energy. And let's point out real quick that we're going to touch on these principles of building science again in the next module briefly. And Southface has a free building science course called The Basics of Building Science, and it walks through all these principles, and it does give you a strong understanding of where are the opportunities within a building. And really quickly, just last year, they adjusted these climate zones as they do periodically, but it was a rather dramatic shift. About 10% of the counties in the country were shifted to milder zones, meaning they're getting warmer and they're getting moister. Here in Georgia, if you look at this, is actually an older map, the colorful one here. In the very north of Georgia, Clarke County is just below the yellow part, but until last year, the year before, that was in climate zone 4, which is mixed. mixed human. And now all of Georgia, as you can see here, is now in climate zone 3. So it kind of complicates things in a way. Yes, climate change is happening. This is built, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory collects this data, and they update this according to what's happening in the climate. And a building built to suit climate zone 4 in North Georgia 10 years ago is no longer in the right climate zone. It doesn't mean that building needs to be completely redone, but there are some factors that play into that. Humidity is an important factor. And this is what we're concerned about in building science, is really about the movement of heat, air, and moisture. And all of these things impact the performance of that building and the systems in that building. Heat transfer, conduction, radiation, convection. It might give some of you, flashbacks from physics class in high school that you couldn't, I struggled as well. It's okay. But these are our building scientists, our people who are designing buildings are well aware of these terms and what's going on in a building. So just, conduction, for instance, insulation in a building is intended to reduce heat loss through conduction, for example. And we'll go into some of these concepts more deeply unless there's protest over it for some reason, but it tends to help us understand everything we do at Southface. Really, when we go out to train people in the green workforce, starts with building science. Quickly, air, infiltration, exfiltration. There's going to be air coming in. You want air coming into your building. You need fresh air, but you don't want unwanted air coming in, and you don't want air to go out in unwanted pathways. If you've already spent all the money to condition that air, you don't need it blowing out through the window. So that's another. Air movement and moisture is a very important thing here in the South. Of course, if you have a lot of moisture in your building, that's going to damage your building and can create health hazards, mold and so on. But high humidity in a room is going to make it feel more uncomfortable. It's going to make it feel warmer than it really is. And somebody's going to reach for that thermostat and turn it down to 68 when 72 would be, or 74 even would be just fine if you had the right humidity level in that room. They don't need a better air conditioner. They may need a dehumidifier. But so these are the factors that are all at play at the root of energy efficiency in a building. There will not be a quiz, don't worry. By the way, this picture is just an infrared picture showing some cool air leaking in. I'm going to breeze through some other things here, and there's a couple of important points when we're talking about what's happening with the envelope and inside a building. And again, we're establishing some common language here, so I think it is worthwhile to understand what we mean by the building envelope. And that's the area within a building that has conditioned air. If you have an attic in your house, think for a minute. Is it a conditioned attic or an unconditioned attic? Most of us, at least a couple houses I've lived in here in Georgia, were unconditioned attics, which is perfectly fine and normal. Gets a little more complicated if you stick your HVAC system and your duct work up in that unconditioned attic, because then you have, here's a duct system. This one happens to be in a conditioned space, but if it's in an unconditioned space, like the old house that I bought that was built in 1991, it gets to 120 degrees in that attic, or I don't know how hot it gets up in that attic, but our duct work was running through the attic with conditioned air in it through superheated ducts. So we recommend, we're leaning more toward this type of attic here, which is a foam insulation. This is a conditioned attic now. It's protected. It's insulated just like the rest of the house. And I'm just showing here a couple of different types of insulation y'all might be familiar with. There's the blow-in insulation, which is very common, but you can't apply this blow-in stuff to the ceiling, right? Insulation bats, they're all over the place. They're fine as long as they're installed correctly. If they're not installed correctly, you can see in this infrared picture where the heat is coming through. And just these little 1-inch gaps in this insulation here, in and of themselves, not that big a deal, but if you see them there, chances are the same person who installed that installed it all the rest of them the same way. And so you have a house with tons of heat loss because of those little gaps. They add up. So these are the kinds of things, and again, we're going to dive a little deeper into this next week. I want to point out another important impact area, which is air leakage, which goes along with, you got your insulation, and then you have these potential air leakage points. And these are all over houses that are built, and still to this day, if nobody's watching what happens when an electrician or a plumber, and no offense to any plumbers and electricians out there, but if you make a penetration to put these wires through or to run a pipe through and you don't fill it, then you're creating all kinds of problems. Can lights, everybody liked the can lights. They were kind of in vogue a few years back, the recessed lighting. Major air suckers. I mean, they're hard to seal and they can cost a lot of energy in a home. And again, you start to add up all these components. The top plates, it's right into the framing itself. It's not just the windows and the penetrations. It's in the framing from the minute the house is built. And just quickly, one problem in the construction industry, or one issue that we come across, is whose job is it to make sure that these holes are getting filled? And some people live by the rule, you make a hole, you fill a hole. But if nobody's watching out for that, that can create issues in a house. So those are that's a really quick rundown, but just to point out that, these are the things that are contributing to that energy burden. I saw a lot of things flashing up on the screen while I was running my mouth. Was there any question or comment? Okay. How are we doing on time?
Got about 20 more minutes allocated.
Okay, cool. That's good. I'm going to quickly, so we talked about envelope, and the second prong on that fork was the systems in the building. And so I'm just going to tick through the list of some of the common systems. Your HVAC system, your air conditioning. This is more of the typical size you're going to see in a residential and a commercial building. You'll start to see some of these much larger units and chillers and things like that. And of course, the duct system is also integrated into that HVAC system. If you have leaky ducts, we do duct leakage testing. If houses are of a certain age, we just kind of assume that they're going to have leaky ducts. But that's going to be an incredible waste of energy in certain situations if you have an old duct system that was not properly sealed. Other systems, furnaces, combustion appliances, and then various components of ventilation systems. It's kind of a commercial exhaust fan. This is the kind of fan you're going to see on a lot of commercial rooftops. This is your common bathroom fan, which, like your common hood over your stove, actually does have an effect on what's happening in the building in terms of air pressure. If you turn on all the exhaust fans in your house, you're going to affect the air pressure in that house and what's going on with air infiltrating and exfiltrating the building. So those are the systems we talk about, and the systems are closely related to the operations and maintenance practices, because the systems are only going to run as well as they're maintained. So maintenance, kind of skipping over to the right side here, but the HVAC system, hopefully most people replace their filters. Hopefully everybody replaces their household HVAC filters, but that's a thing that if you don't do that, you're creating an inefficiency and you're losing money in your house right there with this ugly old beat up filter. They need to be replaced at least a couple times a year. Ducts also need to be cleaned. Maybe they won't get so dirty if you have better filters. But eventually ducts, a really dirty duct system is going to affect efficiency in big ways, not to mention the health. And then the system, the machinery itself needs some periodic maintenance from a professional. And this person here, he's washing out the coils in that big AC unit. So those are, that home maintenance, that's going to protect, it's going to create better efficiency, it's going to protect your investment and promote health other things that are important in both residential and commercial have to do with controls. In a house, everybody has a thermostat. Not everybody has a programmable thermostat. It's a great example of a low-cost piece of technology that, again, is only as good as, you have to use it properly in order to get the benefit from it. But it's going to keep you from, when you go out to work during the day, to keeping your air conditioner running at 72 degrees is pointless. This thermostat will help make sure that you're not just wasting energy when nobody's using the space. The bigger the space, the more important these controls get. This is not a fancy light bulb, it's an occupant sensor. Not something a lot of people are going to need in their homes necessarily, but certainly important in a lot of commercial settings. Not a bad idea in a home if you have a lot of people running around, little people especially, who can't reach the light switches to turn them off. They seem to go turn them on, but not turn them off. So that's another, cheap, pretty cheap, easy, low-hanging fruit that can save a lot of money. That was an interesting question about home, how people's bills are doing because we're all working from home, I think. Which brings me to this next picture of this nice, beautiful workstation. Look at that. They've got the 3 monitors and you get the whole island chain here on those 3 monitors. Plus, looks like an extra TV up here on the wall. I pulled this off the internet. Don't worry, this is not my workstation. But what's wrong with this picture? There's nobody there, and those monitors are sucking energy. The lights are on. You got 2 lights on here. The 3 monitors, beautiful background, but they're all using energy to put that picture up. And in fact, even if the computer was off and there was nothing on those monitors, if nobody physically turns those monitors off, they're still sucking energy. And in fact, your phone charger, where this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think it's interesting, makes you think next time you plug in your phone charger, a phenomenon we refer to as the vampire load, which is most of these appliances that are plugged in, even if you're not using them, are tapping the grid. They're pulling some energy. Even your phone charger without the phone on it is still pulling a little bit of energy. Probably not enough to make or break you as a single person, one household. But again, scale that out over your whole community. How many thousands of phone chargers are just sitting in the walls right now? I don't know if we need to make people feel guilty about that, but that's the kind of thing that, how hard is it to unplug? And what if 1 million people did that? How much electricity would we save? So these are the little things this is really kind of focused on homes. And again, this is kind of a public facing training. So everybody who lives in some sort of a home can relate to these, but it could go on and on about operations and maintenance in the commercial buildings, in these bigger buildings where a lot of the energy is being sucked away. Incidentally, we're almost done here, just a few more slides. But in Georgia and really in the United States in general, residential, again, the single family homes, they're doing okay as far as energy efficiency. They're not great across the board, but compared to the commercial, the residential sector is doing a little better in terms of efficiency. And that's true here in Georgia, in no small part because Georgia has a good residential energy code. Everybody's probably familiar with fire codes and health codes and electrical codes. A lot of people don't realize there is a building energy code, which is enforced the same way as other codes by an inspector who comes in at various stages during the construction process. We could spend hours and hours, and it takes hours, takes at least a full day's training to cover the energy code, and we do it. South Face tried to train every inspector in the state last year, and as well as builders and architects and skilled trades, because Georgia just unveiled its new 2020 building energy code. Does it every 10 years. And it applies to both the residential and the commercial. And I'm not going to this can easily get very confusing and pointlessly if it's not really your job to worry about these things, but there are international bodies, the IECC and ASHRAE, that create the standards. And then states and or localities choose how to apply those codes. IECC and ASHRAE update their codes every 3 years. States can't do that. The process, it takes too long. Anybody here in politics and industry, that's why it's a 10-year cycle. Some states have 5-year, 7-year cycles, but you can't just keep rolling every time they pull out a new standard. State law takes more time. So to add confusion to the matter, I know you probably can't read this, but this was revised and released January 1st, 2020. They call it the 2015 edition because it's based on the IECC 2015. There's now a 2018. ASHRAE, we're on the 2013 edition here in Georgia. That doesn't mean we're bad. We're actually kind of middle of the road, if not on the higher end. We're ahead of a lot of states. A lot of states, not to name names, but like Missouri doesn't have a state energy code. It's kind of up to whatever town you happen to live in. And a lot of states, especially in the South, are still back in 2012.
A participant has left the meeting.
So that's where the energy code comes down. Again, this applies to new construction and renovations. So anything that's being built now is being built to a pretty good standard. Southface has a hand in writing this code, working with the state, and it's pretty good. It will get better, but if something's being built or renovated to code in Georgia, it's pretty good. The code is only as good as the inspection and enforcement regime in the local area, though. So if nobody's enforcing the code, people could be, taking shortcuts. And just incidentally, there is an upcoming shortage of inspectors, not just in energy code, but in all kinds of inspection, just because of retirement and because not enough younger people are taking that pathway. So it's something that's one of those little details somebody in the community needs to be mindful of, is who's actually going out and making sure these things are being done to code. And quickly, also energy code, when you talk about renewable energy technology, putting those solar panels, putting in the EV charging units for your cars, those affect the rest of the family of codes as well. And about 10 years ago, the first electric cars came out, and the first house fires with electric cars in them, firemen showed up, firefighters showed up to find lithium-ion batteries burning in those garages, and it was a bit of a surprise, which they've kind of figured out now. But that kind of thing, this is all related, and there are implications for building performance when you try to integrate these other technologies. If you want to go beyond the code, that's when you start to look to green building certifications. Now, I just put all these pictures here to impress, because there are a lot of programs out there, but LEED is one of the best known in the US. Earthcraft is a Southface brand, which focuses more in the residential area, whereas LEED traditionally was more of a commercial. Now they're both kind of crossing into the other areas as well, but you're going to find more LEED certified commercial buildings out there in the world than single family houses. It's kind of a fancy thing to have a LEED certified house, but they're certainly out there. But not every building is ever going to be LEED certified. The existing buildings, 90% of those, if not more, don't really have a chance or a motivated enough owner to ever become really LEED certified. So the existing buildings are the issue. And this is kind of for part of a future conversation, but the benchmarking is the process of improving building stock in a community. It starts with benchmarking typically. And benchmarking is where you figure out where you stand in that building, in your energy use, your resource use, your water use. There's a free tool out there called Energy Star Portfolio Manager that even a house owner can do it, but commercial buildings, this is where they start. And when you do that benchmarking, you not only figure out, okay, here's how much energy we're using, but you get a score that compares you to other buildings of that same type. And a lot of great math minds have gone into creating these scores. So if you have an office building with 20 stories and so many square feet, et cetera, you're going to get a score relative to other buildings of that type. And that's why that's important, especially from a city planning point of view. As you can say, as I've seen in other cities, we want every city to get at least a 50 score. be 50, better than 50% of other buildings. It's a relatively modest bar. That's an example. If you get up into the 75th percentile and higher, you'll be what's called Energy Star certified. That's a pretty high performing building. But once you get those scores, then you can say to the folks who have buildings that score 30 and 40, hey, you need to get that up to at least 50 or 60 or whatever our standard is in this community. And how do they get there? They do an energy audit to find out where they're losing all this energy in that building. Why are you getting a 30 or 40 out of this building? The energy audit's going to help point to the opportunities in that building, and then they can start making a short, medium, and long-term plan to address those. Replacing the HVAC system in the building is probably not something building owners are prepared to do right now, but they can plan for it. And so that's kind of the process. You'll hear that word benchmarking, and it doesn't excite a lot of people, but it is really a first step in terms of a community to improving its building stock performance. And I'm pretty much wrapped up. I have a couple more points to make here. And then, and these are really just kind of reiterating what some of the low-hanging fruit is, and how you get people attracted to it. So incentives and giving people options. There are different types of incentives. Utilities offer incentives for energy efficiency improvements. If you go to the Jackson EMC website, there is a section on, they give you rebates if you install a new air handler in your house that meets a certain Energy Star rating. And other utilities have really deep incentives for promoting efficiency in commercial systems. That's an area as far as policy and as far as politics and just friendly neighborhood relations, that's a way that utilities get involved in this process. And there may even be some laws requiring them to do that. It doesn't have to all be done through statute and law. There are ways to create momentum by giving people options that we'll discuss in future sessions, that people start to see their neighbors doing it, start to hear how great everything is. We've got the cleanest indoor air in the neighborhood, then other people want to follow. And it's a way to get community organizations involved, focusing in on those equity issues and affordability issues, not just around the energy burden, but around, how are buildings in lower income neighborhoods performing? How are they affecting quality of life in those neighborhoods? And start with that low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of it out there. Think about that pyramid that Andrew talked about a while back. The bottom of that pyramid is all about what you do with energy, not what laws are in your community or what, it comes down, a lot of it to individual choices. So that's my spiel, and I'm going to offer the mic at this point back to Andrew or anybody else who wants to kind of bring it back to the ACES connection here and talk about
Sure.
There.
Do you mind if I interrupt for just one moment? I want to make sure I've seen that Amy's broached a very important question twice now, which is about kind of how do we think about the inefficiency of existing buildings and tackling that versus all of the energy associated with new construction, even though those buildings may be more efficient. I think that's a really important point to make. Our existing buildings are going to be around for decades to come, and I think the national average for turnover rate of replacing out old buildings with new ones is about 2% annually. And which is just to say, even if we are building a lot of super efficient new buildings, that's still just kind of chipping away at the iceberg, if you will. So not to mention the fact that when you build a new building, you're mining materials for the construction of that building, cutting down trees. There's tremendous amounts of carbon emissions associated with cement. And so the environmental impact of building a new building, even though it may be cleaner or more efficient than an older building, is almost always more significant than just retrofitting an older building to be more efficient. So thank you very much for raising that.
And I would just offer to tie this back into ACES. What we've heard today is the selection of our fuel sources, the ways that we manage our existing assets as far as buildings and vehicles, and then the policies we put forward to increase efficiency, incentivize this kind of behavior, and deploy more renewables are all really major key points. And what you'll see is that these points are reflected in that ACES model. And so the model starts with that fundamental, what is our balance? And then it starts to work through some community specific assumptions about, okay, how much efficiency can be done? How many new buildings can be built versus old ones being renovated? And then it starts to get to those questions of, okay, what kind of renewable energy and or battery storage might be viable in our community? And I think with that, maybe we can just throw the field open if there are any more questions about what was covered here.
Okay, we can always continue to send in comments and also to let us know what you think. So that was the educational portion of what we were presenting. That's the first of our educational modules. We hope to have at least 4 more and maybe even additional ones from that based on what you guys tell us. And hopefully that has helped kind of set that groundwork, not only for the cab, but also we are very interested in if you feel like we captured everything with this. We obviously will take some of these things that have been mentioned into account in the final draft of it. What we talked about today will be available through YouTube link that we were sent earlier. So it will be available continuously after this. But also we will put the link up on our webpage, and I'm hoping Southface will put it up on theirs as well once we get it turned into an actual module. So then we're going to move, at this point, Megan, we're going to move you back into the community engagement part of this, which is the meat of the meeting as well.
All right, thanks, Mike. Pulling up my screen now. How's it looking? Good?
It's there for me.
Looks good,
All
Megan.
right. Thanks. All right, now we're going to dig into our public engagement strategy. I'll lead off by introducing 2 sort of 3 terms here. So when for the overarching strategy, we're referring to this as public engagement. And within that, we're talking about 2 buckets. So one is community engagement, which is outreach and education to residents and community members about individual priorities, family level priorities for a clean and renewable energy future. And then we're also talking separately within this public engagement strategy about stakeholder engagement, which is that same concept of outreach and engagement, only this is done with...
Has left the meeting.
Only this is done with small groups of sector-specific organizations, businesses, and institutions to identify and address priorities within those sectors and groups around a clean and renewable energy future. So starting with that first bullet of stakeholders, or excuse me, technically the second bullet here of stakeholders, we'll talk about adapting to this virtual world as well. But when we're talking about examples of stakeholders, we're talking about leaders and experts who will be directly and significantly impacted by the plan development and implementation. So through this process, really what we're looking to do is notify and educate them and solicit detailed and specific feedback from them to help inform the priorities of the plan through engagement with them in a variety of formats. And to also just strengthen the support for the goals of the Clean and Energy Resolution and Plan. So this is the how of how we'll do this. So the city is going to be conducting about 10 one-on-one interviews with some of these stakeholders that are identified around a that'll be selected for a variety of reasons in terms of relevance of content, what they can provide. Oh, and I should also say, as I'm digging into the how and the who, we will be distributing our initial list of stakeholders for your consideration and providing an opportunity for feedback from that over the next week or two. So we'll be getting that to you on Friday, and I'll remind you about deadlines when we wrap this up. Next up is ACC Gov focus meetings. We'll do 2 of those. These are internal staff talking about plan development and implementation with a focus on municipal energy use. So that's energy used at City Hall, other public facilities, by the water treatment plants, et cetera. And then we'll be conducting 3 stakeholder listening sessions. So these will be focused on specific topics, and we'll be inviting expert stakeholders to participate to discuss these priority topics. So there will be one on community and equity, another one on clean energy economy, and another one on built environment. Here, when we're talking about these categories of stakeholders, these are the categories we've identified, and we'll open up the floor for some discussion on these in another slide or two. But these are the major buckets. So we have community and equity groups, energy service providers. When we say energy service provider, we mean both the utility, but as well as the practitioners who are conducting these energy efficiency upgrades, building energy efficient buildings, installing solar panels, et cetera. Environmental organizations, housing focused organizations, jobs and economic development focused groups, large energy users, so that might be your UGAs of the world, but other large hospitals, school systems, large corporate or industrial campuses, neighborhood organizations, real estate, who will be key partners for implementing a policy, and transportation, which will be looking at municipal commercial fleet managers, local transit system, and affinity groups. Now shifting over to the community engagement side of things. So a reminder, that's when we're talking about individual and family level priorities. We'll be conducting 5 community conversations, which are town hall style events that will provide an overview of the plan and its goals, or provide an overview of the clean energy goal and the context for it, and solicit feedback from the community on it. So there will be 5 of these because traditionally, when you're doing these sorts of things in person, you vary geography, you vary time of day to ensure maximum participation as possible across a whole bunch of different demographic groups. Adapting to a virtual world means trying to think of other ways to create those opportunities. So we're talking about varying different times of day and days of the week, as well as topical focus areas, because geographic constraints are less of an issue when everything's virtual. We'll also be conducting 2 public education events. These were, prior to COVID, originally envisioned as being conducted in tandem with other in-person events like festivals, and working with those event organizers. We really solicit your feedback on a really effective way to capitalize on these sorts of public events. And then finally, we'll be doing a community survey that will be done online and pushed out through all of the channels, as many channels as possible, to gauge public views on the plan. It's also going to provide critical information that we'll all use for plan development, including what are the community values in shaping the plan, what level of support or even familiarity with regard to the plan exists right now. That'll help us know who we need to be touching and who we need to be working harder to make sure we're touching. It'll help identify views on clean energy sources. What do people think is clean? What are their concerns? And it'll also help us prioritize clean energy policy and program areas to identify what will really be most impactful in the short run versus medium term versus long term, and where the community's at with those things. So second slide regarding the community level engagement. There are challenges like geographic targeting, as we address in the virtual world, and more importantly, in terms of constraints, technology access and digital divide. So this is another hurdle. We really would benefit from your insight into how to make sure that we're reaching a really diverse group of stakeholders, including those who may not easily be able to participate or get access to information around the online events we'll be hosting. So the objective of these events is to notify and educate community members about the plan and its goals, inform the community about the city's progress to date and its plans moving forward, and to get that insight into community priorities moving forward. So now I'm going to open this up to just, yes.
Sorry, I just noticed a question in the chat about it being everything online from Michael Songster.
Yes. So that is, I think that falls into the series of questions we have here. We can lead off with that. I think that's a really good discussion question that I'd love the group's feedback around, which is, what are your thoughts on how we need to handle this virtual situation, the COVID constraints around engagement? I know it's right now, it seems like everything needs to be done online. Are there other options that we should be considering?
Are you talking about for the public engagement and education? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I still will go back to something I've mentioned before, and that is looking at local radio stations and just getting people on local talk shows as frequently as possible. I think, you know, before you even have any of these public meetings, just to begin to engage people, I think if there's Facebook messaging, I think if there could be live Facebook video sessions, you know, where even, I mean, and I don't know who would do them. You know, if CAB member, like if I were to do one, like, you know, I'm not sure that I would have enough information, but I just really think that I think a lot of people have gotten used to that these days. You know, I mean, you see politicians doing it, you see local advocacy groups doing that, having kind of a live Facebook session and people can tune in, it's interactive. And again, I think looking at local radio stations and seeing, I just think before we have these actual more formal sessions, just getting the word out in every possible way that we can is important.
Thanks, Amy. Does anyone else have any feedback on that?
So I'm with Amy on the idea of local radio and some sort of format where it's a discussion. It's 30 minutes long. There's lots of hosts that are on local radio stations that people are familiar with. That I think a show could be done with hosts that already exist. So something like that, I think, has the potential to reach people that you'll never ever reach through an online format.
And there's also yeah, I mean, like I've said, you know, WXAG, WGAU. I'm sure I know those two in particular. The Chamber and Envision Athens have been hosting community conversations. I mean, that's going to reach people who are probably already somewhat involved, but Envision Athens has definitely been doing a lot lately to try to inform people. So, but yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else on that topic?
I think the other thing that we will say is this is also where we're hoping the CAB will be able to help us extend out. We have a question on neighborhood leaders and things like that. So yeah, these are all areas it's very helpful to kind of understand the scope of the outreach potential so that then we can begin to craft a strategy to reach that would involve all of us. So please continue to let us know avenues that you think we can be constructive in and be able to be effective in, and then we'll work with you guys to craft out that strategy.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll start digging into these questions, but I do want to just encourage this to be a discussion. So please chime in if you have any thoughts that you want to share on this. But the first one we identified was, are there any other categories of stakeholders that need to be added? I'll move back up to the list I had. And just, are there gaps here that we're not seeing?
It seems like the people in the building industry, the construction industry, who would be, to talk about the impacts on there, if there were additional regulations, how that would affect them, what kind of, what kind of trainings or things might need to be done. But and since I work for one, I feel like I better bring that up. I think that will be an important group to reach out to.
What about, this may sound weird, but actually bring in, the utilities, Georgia Power, Jackson EMC, whoever might service the area within that point, getting them on board, or at least to provide their input, update on some of the renewable energy programs that they have, like Georgia Power's, adapting to monthly net metering for some solar PV systems like my own. Bringing them might help.
Yeah,
So is
that makes
that
sense.
currently covered under energy service providers? I see electric and natural gas utilities towards the end of that.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of looking at that as maybe more the installers, but okay, yeah, sorry, I missed that.
So I'll just share my personal approach here. Athens has a weird utility mix, right? So we have 4 electric providers, 1 master natural gas provider, a bajillion natural gas servicers. And then we've got some of these outliers like a Oglethorpe EMC or a Green Power EMC or a Cherry Street Energy that's in the solar funding game. I would offer that we've heard a lot from the biggest power provider in the region, and they have some good things to offer. We can certainly go through what those are and what role they might play. I'm personally interested to know a little bit more about the smaller ones or the outliers. The EMCs have incredible flexibility to try new things, and we saw that in Walton EMC. They were one of the first community solar arrays in the nation, and so my 2 cents as a non-voting member is I'm hopeful that maybe some of those smaller folks will bring interesting perspectives.
I second that, Andrew. This is Lisa from South Face. You are, I think Athens-Clarke County has the unique opportunity of working with multiple utilities to move towards this 100% goal, and not being, to some extent, beholden to only one. So while it might seem as though it's an added complexity to be served by multiple utility providers in the electric space, and then as Andrew mentioned, there are a number of retail natural gas providers because of the deregulated or competitive natural gas landscape here in Georgia. I think it presents a very interesting opportunity to partner with all of those electric utilities to move towards this aim. And it'll be interesting to see which utilities have what types of programs that are already meeting the need and are currently contemplating and thinking through programs and initiatives that may work with the community to meet the need in the years ahead.
Thanks, folks. Is somebody about to say something?
Yeah, so in the jobs and economic development, like the small business associations are listed there. I'm not sure who that is locally, but I wonder if it's possible to bring in actual small business owners that might be representative of different industries, so that they could have the opportunity. Because like I said, I have a small business, and I'm not really necessarily connected to the business community, but I don't know what that organization is that could speak for other small businesses in Athens knowledgeably and reliably.
I think it depends on what small business you are and who you affiliate with. Some of the small businesses are affiliated. There's several groups There's the Northeast Georgia Business Alliance. There's the East Side Athens Business Leaders Association. There's Athens Made. There's the Chamber. Those are some that I can kind of think of off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Michael, were you thinking of a specific category for that group that then could be focused on that way?
Not necessarily. I guess I guess I'm thinking of the businesses that I interact with and see a lot of that are small restaurants and pubs and small retail stuff, very local oriented stuff. And maybe Athens Made, as Ilka mentions, they're representative and could do a job of do a good job of giving us insight into the interest. But I just kind of wonder if there's some if you might get a different response from actual business owners versus business organizations that represent them.
I agree, Michael. I think that's a great idea. Just because of even the diversity of the businesses within those groups, and then the groups sort of have different either geographical or other sort of other focus areas. A lot of them are kind of which part of the community you're located in. But I like the idea of sort of having a diverse in terms of lots of different things, including like what your small business is focused on, where it's geographically located, what kind of building you're in, even whether you're in a newer building versus an older building, that sort of thing, and just finding a diverse group of small businesses.
What I've heard so far is adding in a small business type category and adding potentially developer to real estate. That is that. At some point, we're going to get the list probably pretty big, and then we'll have to figure out how to kind of put things back together. But if there's a feeling that the developers need kind of a separate section, we could look at that to start with as well. Or Amy, do you feel like they fit in well enough with the real estate group?
Well, I think when I made my comment about just kind of the construction industry, the engineering community, just that the group that's going to be implementing any regulations or things like that, I hadn't really read through the real estate, and I think that's intended to capture that group, I think. But I guess, developers kind of, I think that's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of, if you're gonna develop something new and you're gonna have new standards or new regulations, or you're trying to provide incentives for people, I think having their input as to what would be an incentive for them or what would make them want to do it versus, I think so where they fit. I think the real estate, I'm not sure that I would call that real estate. I feel like that maybe isn't the best category, but the best title for that category, but I think they could fall into that group. I think there's a similar stake, I guess.
Well, certainly at the large level, developers kind of interface pretty heavily with real estate. So if there's a thinking that we would divide them out.
No, I just hadn't read everything under that category, and real estate didn't pop into my head I'm thinking realtors basically. So I think that's why once I read through it, I thought, oh, okay, I think could fit.
What you made me think you were headed toward also is like rental companies that because that would certainly be a different perspective as well as people who are managing rental companies. As opposed, because there's different regulations there. Different viewpoints there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is there any more input on the public stakeholders? We are kind of closing in on time.
Okay, I'm going to take that as my cue to move back to the questions. All right. So I'm going to combine the middle two questions into one condensed question, which is, one, can you help us with direct engagement? And because like you guys are trusted allies in sectors of the community that we just aren't, because we're representing the government, and you guys can really be tremendously impactful in making sure that we are able to engage as broad a swath of the community as possible with regard to this plan development process. And so tying into, I guess, that statement I just made, we're wondering for your insights on what ways should we be using to reach out to the stakeholders that don't neatly fit into these categories? And I guess, how can you help us with that?
We've heard several examples already of things that we can incorporate, so we want that thought pattern to keep going. If you're kind of stumped at this point, you feel free to text. To email. You can send it to Maggie and myself, and we will certainly put that to the group so it can get incorporated out there. And as we go forward, if you have a thought at a later point, that may not be too late then. So don't hesitate to share.
Yeah. So we'll talk about this again. Sorry.
I was just saying, to double into Mike, we'll send out a quick form with these same questions that you guys can fill out following this meeting once you've had a chance to reflect. What were you starting to say, Amy?
Oh, am I right that this is on the agenda for the next meeting too? I can't remember what I felt like to discuss the engagement strategy.
We do have a meeting that we're scheduling for October 7th. That's going to be informational. It's going to be one of the education modules. And then the next time we see another agenda of this type will be at the October meeting. So we'll bring it up again, and I believe the idea is to go a little bit more in depth at that point with the public engagement strategy. So you will get to see it again as we begin to flesh that out. We do want to make sure that the educational foundation is where it needs to be, not only for the CAB members, but we feel like it's really important to have all our resources ready to go when we enter into that public engagement section, so we can reference people to these YouTube, these podcast sort of approaches to help them expand out their knowledge and help them understand as well.
Megan, did you say that Friday we would be receiving a list of stakeholders that you have? Is that a preliminary list that will be incomplete, or what should we expect?
It'll be preliminary. It'll be provided in like a Google Sheet format, and we'll create a mechanism for you to be able to send feedback our way on that list. We really want your feedback on that list, and that's going to be a big part of our prep on our end between now and the next CAB meeting, is reviewing your feedback and reporting out to you what we hear from you and identifying a path forward with this new stakeholder recommendation that are identified. So that's a big part of the next CAB meeting, is focusing on these specific stakeholders and how to engage them individually.
I wonder, not to come at this from a negative point of view, but I think when, I was just wondering about some kind of really quick survey that might be sent to stakeholders early on, and one really simple question could be, or kind of quickly summarize what's going on and what the goals are and everything, and then just say, do you have any concerns about what might how this might look in the end? Because I think for people who aren't all that knowledgeable to say, what do you like about this? Well, a lot of times they don't know enough to really say that. But by asking what their concerns are, you also might get at what they don't understand. So, that might be an easy way to get a lot of information from all these different stakeholders at one time to kind of help us see like, wow, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about that, or wow, we hadn't thought about that particular issue. And I think some people will be very specific. I don't know. Anyway, I don't need to say more, but that might be a way to get a lot of information and get a handle on where people are.
Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a two-step process where you'd send this thing out broadly, and then you get information back, and then you could engage people directly, kind of with the information that you gather from there, and the people who actually responded in some cases.
That's also where the CAB could be extremely helpful as questions come up and we see different responses from folks. That may be that if you have a particular relationship with somebody, you're friends with them, then that would give you the opportunity to reach out and share information. So, I mean, that could be a very, very effective tool.
Yeah, or we could even if you, were to say, oh, well, I know that person, I'll schedule a Zoom call, and not that I can answer all their questions, but I can dig down deeper into what it is that they're really concerned about, or so yeah, that would be a cool way, and that'd be a great way for us to learn a little more too.
I keep looking for the like button on my video, but it doesn't pop up, like on your text messages.
So we're almost at time, so I'll just ask the final question of what else would be helpful to know about the strategy?
I don't think I know what I don't know.
Yeah.
That's all I can think of.
I feel the same way.
Is this the question for the public engagement, or just for us on CAB?
Both.
Okay. Well, one thing that first popped in my mind when I saw that is like, ultimately, who's going to pay for it? Or if we having I'm sure somebody's going to ask that.
Yep. Oh, yes. That's a popular question in my experience. All right. Then let's go to just wrapping up. We don't have 10 minutes, we have 3. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. So today we walked through this new process we'll be using around an education series. Walked through the basics of clean energy, renewable energy with Mike Ford. And we did an initial introduction to the public engagement strategy. So the follow-up items that'll be coming your way is a survey to identify the remaining education topics that we are going to cover with y'all and help get a better read on where everyone's at in terms of knowledge and where they want to get stronger in. So next, after that is we'll be sending invitations to you to the upcoming education events that have been scheduled. I'll note those events are going to be recorded. So if you're not able to attend some of these off-cycle meetings, don't worry about it. You can always catch up on it by video. We'll also be, come this Friday, sending you the public engagement strategy and preliminary stakeholder lists that we've discussed. And we'd like your feedback to be provided to us on that by September 25th so that we can get to work. So that we can get to work synthesizing all that information for review in next month's CAB meeting. So with that, as always, Mike and Maggie are your people if you have any questions.
Well, and just to be clear too, so you kind of know, unless I got this wrong, Megan, you will be sending out, Southface will be sending out a survey, and it will be going back to Southface So that will come and go from her, and we'll be sending out the meeting for the October 7th and the agenda and information from our office. So they'll be coming from two different sources, just so you kind of know why you're getting them from different people.
Thanks, Mike. It's an important flag. All right. Well, thank you everybody very much for your time today. We really appreciate the feedback you provided.
The education session was great. I really appreciated it.
Excellent. So if there's ways we can improve it, please let us know. That's what we're doing. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you, everybody.
Maggie Songster,
Has left the meeting.
Megan O'Neill.
Has left the meeting.